Welcome to the Campground Catalyst Podcast, the show dedicated to fueling success in outdoor hospitality. Whether you're an outdoor adventurer, a campground owner, or looking to build your legacy in outdoor hospitality, you're right where you need to be. We're here to guide you through the fascinating world of campground management, unique real estate strategies, and the gratifying opportunities created by outdoor hospitality. Our mission is to inspire and equip you with the knowledge and insights you need to build a successful business and create a legacy worth leaving. The Campground Catalyst Podcast is proudly sponsored by Beyonder Camp, your trusted outdoor hospitality experts. Subscribe now, join our active online community, and let's ignite our passions and potential together.
All right, welcome back to the Campground Catalyst Podcast. This episode, we'll be discussing the Legacy Builders section. We'll be talking about your succession planning for ensuring the future of your campground business. With me today are my co-hosts, Adam Lendy, Robert Earl, and myself. Justin Hoggett is away on vacation this week. I wish him the best of luck where he's at. But getting into this topic here, as any campground owner comes into it, most likely you think it's going to be your dream thing to do here. You're going to retire and then live on your campground, enjoy life and relax and have fun. But you need to plan for at some point in the future. You may not want to be running it anymore yourself. You may want to go and enjoy vacations and travel the world, go see your grandkids or whatever it may be. And so you need to have some plans in place and how you can do that, how you can step away from the business, but still have it operate to the level you want. And even at some point down the road, if you may want to eventually sell it or even leave it to some heirs at some point. So as we get into this discussion, I guess let's focus maybe a bit more on the operations side, and we'll discuss maybe with Robert here. I guess what are some things that campground owners need to consider and think about as they plan for those future events of one day? Maybe again, most people may not want to actually sell it. That's like their baby. I've known some of those they built it from the ground up, and this is their life and blood. They don't want to just give it away, but they want to build this maybe step away. So what are some things people could do for that, Robert?
Well, you brought that up, is that when they buy the campground or they establish the campground, and many times what they've established is a job. We've talked about that in other episodes, that they've created an environment where they themselves, their significant other, their partner also is working there in the campground. And as the campground matures, as the owners mature, have they had a discussion with the heirs? Have they talked with their heirs about what is the next step for the campground? And I bring up a couple different things. I think of the, HBO or Showtime special, the show Succession, right? Where everybody's at each other's throat. But honestly, if you have not had the discussion with your heirs, you could end up having brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles at each other's throats, because even though they're not actively participating in the campground, they look at it in a couple different ways. They look at it as the cash out potential that could occur if the campground were to sell or were to be passed on to someone else, or they are working their own job knowing that mom and pa are taking care of it, and one day they hope themselves to retire into it. So you may have one of your family members that didn't know that there was any sort of plan that was in place. So that's one portion of having the discussion of what I was looking at here. The second part of it is operating your campground is, are you really setting it up where you are the brand and people are coming to the campground because they like, know, and trust you, because you are the person that's there? I know we were at one of the campground expos, and there was a sweet couple that was there that every single weekend they do a potluck, that they do the main event of the potluck. I guarantee you, if they stopped having those, about half of their guests would stop showing up. So do they really have a business that they can pass along that there would be some level of succession with? Or have they put systems in place? Have they put the finances in place? Have they put things that are there so it really truly is a business that could pass on to someone else, whether they purchased it or other family members that are able to run it?
I think so long as the meatloaf recipe comes with the sale, they might be able to keep that one going.
You still can't make it the same way that he did, though.
Seriously. Yeah, great point. That doesn't have the love is not baked into it. The other, along those lines, though, Robert, as well as we're talking about family campgrounds. You may yourself, you and your spouse or your family owns it. But what about in cases of there's a partnership? Like if you and I were to buy a campground today, and we are running it together, even with our families, but maybe one day one of us were to have an untimely death or disagreement, and no longer we don't want to be partners anymore. There's a plan for that. I mean, even just when Adam and Justin first started, there was their plan. They wanted to just go buy a couple of campgrounds together and own it on their own, right? But as we all know, not we can't all plan for the future, not knowing what may happen tomorrow. So
Well,
we need to be set aside for something like that, right? So what's some other options people could look at?
Well, we can plan. I've spent enough over the years with divorce attorneys. I don't want to sound like Rodney Dangerfield here, but I'm telling you, if I have to spend one more dollar, so I've done it that way, where you're trying to pay for attorneys on the back end because you didn't plan for something to occur. And I also know in my real estate career, when I've had real estate teams or partnerships or property management, taking the time up front and making that part of your checkup that you have, putting an agreement in place. When you say partnership, I immediately think of, okay, is it 5149? What is the structure? What is the setup there? Planning to go through and say, if something were to go on, if one of the individuals were to have a sickness, an illness, something along that line. If somebody's needs were to change, they have a grandchild that has medical issues or needs to go to college, they need money out of it. Planning out those types of things beforehand and having it as a checkup that's going on, it's far more beneficial to pay for the attorneys up front than to pay for it on the back end.
Yeah, that's going to be what I was going to jump into is on the attorneys, 100%. Don, you mentioned when Justin and I started this. Now, it's funny is our attorneys told us right up front, hey, not every partnership just because you have two people is 50-50, right? Now, in our case, it was. We were both putting in the same hours. We were putting in dollar for dollar, bootstrapping the business to get it off the ground. So we were a 50-50 structure, but that's something for a lot of people to think about. If you're partnering, whether even if it's a family member, but if it's a friend, anybody else, really consider, is it really truly 50-50? That's a really great place to start. And maybe it's a tough conversation to have. Nobody wants to say, hey, gosh, I think you're only 40%. Why am I 10% less than you? Well, because I thought of it. I found the property. I sourced the debt, whatever the case is. There are a lot of things that can factor in. But then getting that operating agreement, it's just like a prenup. So had Robert had a prenup, he might not have spent as much on divorce attorneys over the years. But having that prenup in business, it really does increase the odds that you're going to have a successful business outcome. And it covers a lot of those unknowns, so we've got, for example, in our company operating agreement, that's changed a lot over the past few years as we've grown and brought partners in and such. But when it started, it was 50-50. We had to have a tiebreaker in there, because if we got to a deadlock, we had to have a third party, intermediary who was able to vote in it to break that tie. So Justin and I had to agree upon a guy that we knew who we both felt would be equal to both of us in case we got in that situation. And that's something that anybody should think about. Even if you're running one campground, absolutely critical, because if you get in a position where one person wants to sell, the other person doesn't, one person wants to pay for a big needed improvement, the other person doesn't see the value in it and wants to pinch every penny, these are situations that can devastate your business. It's going to come out in other ways. Your campers are going to see it. They're going to feel it either whether you're interacting with them directly, they're going to feel the stress, or your employees are going to feel it and convey it through. It's going to ruin the business. So getting that operating agreement ironed out right up front, that's probably the most important step, because it's also going to include things about what happens if you die. So what if one person kicks the bucket tomorrow, who's the successor, or what's the successorship plan from there?
Yeah. And along those lines, that's something I learned or heard years ago from people talking about partnerships and how to get out of it. Because again, you and I might be in a partnership, but if one of us were to pass, we may not want to be partners with our spouse or our children or whoever may take our place, right? So a great contingency plan there is to include a insurance policy, like a life insurance on each other that basically the company pays for. That if one of us were to die, then that policy essentially pays out the other party, so we don't have to be necessarily partnering with the spouse or the children. That was not the intention. So that way they get satisfied and get what they need, but it's also not causing a strain on the business or having to try to figure out what to do or to have fights about who does what and how much they should get paid and whatnot. It's all stipulated, like I said, in the operating agreement and with that insurance policy to kind of cover those needs, right? Is that something that both of you guys have followed in your past partnerships you've been in?
Most definitely, you want to make sure that you have a key man or key person policy that's in place for the individuals that are there, especially when you have a situation where one party is the one that's actually on site operating. They, for all practical purposes, are the manager, and someone else has stroked the check, has either provided the land, has provided the property. I see it a lot in the groups that I follow on Facebook. As someone says, I just got a small piece of property, I'm putting a park on it, but they're not the ones that provided the property. They're not the ones that are providing the financing. So what happens when you're in that type of situation? Also, partnerships change from the standpoint of who the parties that are involved, and then the situations that come up. What I mean by situations that come up, zoning rules that change around the park that could cause other types of industries to come in that don't make the park as viable as it originally was, or provide for expansion opportunities. Those are some of the things. Another aspect of it is tax rules that change. We talk a lot about tax rules here, and if you're not following along on our Patreon community, you're missing out on some of the tips and the tricks that we're providing there. Again, it's not to illegally avoid taxes, it's to follow the map that has been laid out for you. So you might have a structure in place for your partnership, what your structure is corporately, and then the tax laws change either at the county, state, or federal level. You need to be able to adjust that, and I need to be able to come to, hey, Don, hey, Adam, here's what's occurred. We need to have a dialogue and not put it off until it's too late.
Yep, absolutely.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, along those lines, even with with Beyonder, might be surprised how many times I talk with investors, and that's one of the questions that comes up. Yeah, especially when they either read on the bios or hear that Adam and Justin love paragliding and flying small planes. So they always like, well, what happens if they don't come back? And it's like, well, yeah, we have things in place. We have teams, and like we can fill the gap if we have to. Hopefully, we don't ever have to come to that, because it will be still a scramble to have to deal with that situation, obviously. But we would not be left, wondering what to do and just have to walk away and leave all our investors, holding the bag or something. So is that ever come up in your conversations, Adam, since with all the high adventure stuff you guys do?
Yeah, I just told them that's where we have Don and Robert with us, just in case, we both go down on a plane. So, no, it's seriously consideration. And it goes back to what you mentioned too, of course, which is on that survivorship and what happens. So, it's drafted in the operating agreement, if we have, one person pass, what's the succession? Is it their spouse taking over that side of it? Is it a third party LLC that might have its own operating agreement? That's something to consider. I operate as part of our company under another LLC. So you guys might not even know what the contents of that operating agreement on that side are and who is taking control. I might be delegating control off to somebody else. You have no idea who it is. So it's worth laying it all out on the table and putting this together. And like you mentioned, the life insurance is a big component of that too. That's a great way, especially as your business grows in value. Maybe early on, that first year in your campground, if you consider how much the loan would be if you had to pay it off, you might have very, very little equity in the company, very little value. But as the years go on, that could quickly become a 7-figure number, and that might be something that you're not prepared to buy out the other half on. So having something like that life insurance policy that's paid by the business might be deductible. That might be a good CPA question right there. That could be a great insurance policy just in case when somebody has an untimely death. But as far as the survivorship goes, I mean, that's something you need to think about day one, and just say, hey, whether you or I go, who's taken the other one's place. Obviously we can probably agree in most cases. I know my wife and Justin's wife have no interest in running this business, so I don't think you're going to have to worry about either of them coming into Beyonder anyway and taking over the reins. But who is going to step up? And that's got to be drafted in the agreement as well too. So it's an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure, no doubt.
Let's talk about something that's also a practicality, especially when we're dealing with the the ma and pa or a small campground is the situation that the managers slash owners live on the property. They haven't had the opportunity to invest in the outside real estate market. This is the place that they live. This is the house that was built was on the property for them. And if there's anything that occurs to one party or the other, or that the park has to change hands, where are these individuals going to live? And you need to factor that into the expense. You talked about, well, they would retire, they'd be able to go visit their grand.
Yeah. Goes
Well
to the
said,
grandkids.
Robert.
Yeah. Yeah. At
Well,
some point, we'll get Robert back on here in a minute, but there we go. I think you're back, Robert.
No, I was saying if they want to retire, they want to visit other areas, they have to be able to afford an RV. They have to be able to live someplace else. And you need to factor that into whether it be the succession or whether it be the amount that the campground is worth and what somebody's willing to pay for it when they're cashing out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one thing I want to jump into, Don, is talking about, how you operate the business during the time you own it, just in case something happens. Because what you might find, I actually had a conversation just this week with a campground owner who lost a partner, and they, after losing that partner, really didn't have it in them anymore to keep running the campground. It wasn't fun anymore. Really lost the passion and ready to move on. That's where we're coming in at this point now. And so that's a reality, is that you might not know when it's time to sell. So I'm going to go back to something we've said on here before. If you've been listening to this podcast, you've heard me say it more than once. If you're a campground owner who we've talked about buying your campground, I might have coached you on this before, talked to you about it before. I know our investors have heard it before, but I'm going to say it again. Run your business every single day like you might have to sell tomorrow, because you never know what tomorrow is going to have in the cards for you. You might have a health event. You might lose a partner. You might be running this alone with your spouse or just alone by yourself. And you might be forced in a situation like Robert mentioned. There might be a county ordinance change, and it now makes your park impossible to keep running, or for you at least impossible to keep running. And if you have not been running a tight ship on your finance specifically, you might be leaving all your money on the table. We've mentioned this before, of course, how your sale value is calculated in the end using that cap rate. If we're in a 10 cap market, let's just say for simplicity's sake, and you cheat the IRS on $10,000 worth of taxes this year, that short-term gain has about $100,000 consequence on your sale price. That's a really big thing to consider, if that's really worth it, considering that $10,000 you might have paid $500-$600 in taxes on that, whatever the case might have been. So was it really worth it? And if you compound this year over year, you take all the cash out of the washing machines and out of the drawer and you don't report it, you're letting people pay you cash for the reservations just so you can pay less at the end of that 1 year. Gosh, you might be putting yourself in a really, really hard spot and leaving a ton of potential value on the table. So I'll get off the soapbox on that, but I think that's something that every business owner needs to think about, even if you're young and you think you got years and decades ahead of you.
Yeah, definitely. And as along those lines is making sure you are working with a qualified, CPA or tax advisor, because just doing your taxes through H&R Block or your at home tax software, you may not be considering the depreciation you should be taking on that property. And whether you like it or not, when you go to sell it, the government's going to assume you did take out the depreciation benefits, and they're going to want to recapture that. So you make sure you're at least getting the benefit of it if you're going to be paying for it anyway down the road.
Yep.
So.
Yeah,
okay,
that's a good point. That will likely offset your income. If you get your bonus depreciation, you optimize it, you'll offset a lot of what you make, especially in your first few years. So you might as well be reporting what you're making and keep that property value high. Make guys like us pay more for your property.
Exactly right. Okay, so we've talked about now the succession planning for untimely death, partnership situations. I think we discussed a little bit about maybe one day retiring and wanting to step away, but still have your operations in place. What else should people be considering when they're considering their business, even from the day they start? If they're building it from the ground up or purchasing one to take over, with the end in mind. Obviously, like you said, Adam, work it each day as if you're going to sell it. But what else should people be thinking about and considering when they're getting into it? And maybe if they've already been into it for a year or two, what should they be doing now once they get those first things up front? They got their insurance plans and all that, their operating agreement in place. What's next? What should they be focusing on?
Well, two aspects that come to my mind is one, should they be affiliated with the franchise? If they're affiliated with the franchise, they're giving away a bit of the control. And what I mean by that is they'll have a time period that they'll be locked into where they're paying the franchise fees, where they're doing the different payments that they have to make. Those will continue on, and they could be a branding, and they could be a cost burden to the campground. So that's something to be considering as well, is do you really want to make that sort of partnership where you're handing over a bit of the reins of the campground? So what is it again that you're trying to accomplish when you're doing that? On the flip side of that, it may be something where you look at a management agreement, where you look at an opportunity where you have your partnership agreement in place, you have your succession planning, but you bring in a professional to actually manage the campground, whether it be in the form of a service like Beyonder has, or a professional manager that's actually taking some of the burden off yourself. Yes, it's an additional expense that you would look at, but you know the park is being run correctly and that you'd be able to get the maximum amount of proceeds that are out of it. In both cases as well, this impacts your staff. Your staff is going to be very much tied to whether or not it's a franchise, whether or not it's management, whether or not it's you that's working on it. They want to know that they're making a sweat equity investment and that they're getting a good payout return in salary or compensation, and that they know that they're building a legacy of what's there. They need to know. They don't need to know all the details of the agreement, but they need to know what the direction is and what the vision is for the campground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Robert, and you made a good point. That management agreement actually could end up being a lifeline. If you get in a position like we've discussed today, where you and your partner were running it, and they have an accident, a death, whatever the case is, and they can't work, and maybe you weren't involved in running the books and running the operations. This might be the lifeline that comes in and saves your business. However, it could also be something that prepares you and potentially optimizes your property value. Let's be real. I think we do this professionally every single day, and I think we still leave opportunities on the table to make revenue here and there. If you're somebody who's not on the the leading edge of the industry and keeping up with all the trends, there might be a lot that is not even realized in your business today, and that if you brought somebody else in, you might be able to hand over some or all the control, maximize the cash flow in your business, maximize that potential resale value. So that could be a fantastic move up front. We offer a tool that helps you figure out where you're at and see if there's meat left on the bone, so to speak, that we call the Beyonder Cares assessment that we offer on our website. No charge for campground owners, just to understand how they're doing their operation, where the opportunities are. But one thing I want to kind of go into, and this goes off of what Robert mentioned, is document your processes, your systems. That's really where the value comes in this, because if I'm buying your business, kind of like the potluck Robert mentioned, if I don't know all the ins and outs and how to do everything the way you've been doing it, really all I'm buying is your assets. I'm buying your real estate and your assets. If I'm buying a business, that business needs to have a manual, needs to have processes in place, so that somebody off the street can walk in tomorrow and run it the same way you are without any decline in service.
That's perfect and excellent. Yeah, and that goes, I guess, in line with, whether you're doing it on your own, right? You having your own property, you're self-managing, or for your family or whoever wants to step in. But along the lines of having that professional management company, like such as Beyonder Camp, to manage it for you. Not only that, first of all, it makes it so you can actually step away from the business. You can actually go and enjoy your lifestyles you probably initially dreamed when you started the property, that you want to one day retire and travel the world or whatever. You can actually step away and do that and let somebody else manage the day-to-day operations for you. But it also, in the long run, will make your property easier to sell, because when somebody else wants to come and buy it, one, they're going to most likely have good books for all your finances to be able to hand over and say, here's what we got. But also, it makes it easier for a new buyer to come in and say, okay, well, great, there's already management in place, I can just take it over and they can keep running it like they've been doing, and I can sit back and enjoy my vacation and relax and then retire, buying a property that's already managed and don't have to worry about it. So it'll make it much more attractive for potential buyers to buy from you if you have that in place, rather than knowing that you're going to be they're going to be replacing you and have to now worry about hiring staff and hiring people to take it over, and do all that stuff, which is something we do pretty every day anyway when we buy new properties. But something to consider as well for your future value of your property, and the easiest to sell it as well.
Yeah, not to mention that that partnership and management. You mentioned obviously that can be your way to vacation. A lot of us get into this business because it's fun. We like to camp. It's something we like to do, and we don't really think about that. If you don't get the right systems in place up front, you're going to be working 7 days a week. And that's usually what I see. Is I meet a lot of campground owners who look 80, but they're really 55, just because they're so beat up from working 12-hour days, 7 days a week, and they're just tired. They can't do it anymore. They're socially fulfilled. They get to talk with great people and meet great people every single day, and they're just tired. And that's where having that plan up front, even if it's just you bring in a manager who you train on your systems, a professional manager in the park, that might be enough to free you up to take the much needed vacations that actually extend your life and your longevity in the business.
Excellent. All right, well, as we wrap it up here, any final thoughts from either of you two guys?
Plan, and have those tough conversations. They really are tough conversations when you are talking about those types of things. I remember my grandparents talking to us as a family and talking about setting up a trust. And there were certain family members that just did not want to have the conversation the first time that it came up. Blessings to my grandparents that they were persistent and continued to have the conversation and created an environment where that conversation could occur, because no one wants to talk about what could happen or the ifs and ands. Yet having that type of conversation is going to pay off in the long run.
Definitely. Yeah. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. They're tough for sure, but it's something you have to do. And it's much easier on everyone to have that discussed and planned about ahead of time than trying to figure it out after the fact. As anybody who's gone through a death in their family and somebody does not have a will or something, then you know what I'm talking about. It's much easier to have that taken care of and not to worry about figuring everything else later. All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Campground Catalyst podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and obviously share. If you enjoy the content that we share here on these podcasts, share it with people you think who would benefit from it, either campground owners or campers or people that may be curious but to know more. And of course, come and join us on the Patreon community. Join us there for some private chats and some get some personalized content that you can't find elsewhere. It's not on our YouTube channel. It's not on our podcast. It's only in the Patreon community. Get some more additional tips and tricks and insider information. So join us there, and we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Campground Catalyst Podcast, where we take you behind the scenes in the fun and gratifying world of outdoor hospitality. We hope you were inspired by today's show and better equipped to take the next steps in your journey. Remember, you can continue the conversation and connect with fellow enthusiasts by visiting our website and joining the Campground Catalyst community on Patreon at campgroundcatalyst.com. There, Patreon members get exclusive access to special listener perks, they get their opportunity to engage with the host, and they get their questions answered on one of our future upcoming shows. The Campground Catalyst podcast is proudly sponsored by Beyonder Camp, your trusted partner in fueling your success in outdoor hospitality. Until next time, keep both your campfires and your passions burning.